Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to Artificial Fluency Podcast. I'm Emma, your host, and I am so excited you've decided to spend this hour with me today. This is episode 23, and if you're new here, welcome to our little community of English learners who believe that learning a language is about so much more than just grammar and vocabulary. It's about connecting with others, growing as a person, and discovering new perspectives about life. Today's episode is very special to me because we're going to talk about something that I'm truly passionate about, life lessons that have the power to change everything. You know, as I've been teaching English and meeting students from all around the world, I've realized that the most meaningful conversations we have aren't just about language learning, they're about life itself. Whether you're 16 or 60, whether you're just starting your English journey or you've been studying for years, I believe that the stories and lessons we'll share today will resonate with you. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings trying to figure out this beautiful, complicated thing called life. In the next hour, we'll explore 3 powerful themes that have personally transformed my life and the lives of so many people I've met. First, we'll talk about the courage to embrace failure and how our biggest mistakes often become our greatest teachers. Then, we'll dive deep into the importance of authentic relationships and how learning to be vulnerable can completely change the quality of our connections with others. Finally, we'll discuss the journey of finding your purpose and how sometimes the path to your dreams looks nothing like what you expected. But before we begin, I want you to know that this isn't just a listening exercise. As we go through these stories and lessons, I encourage you to reflect on your own experiences. Maybe grab a notebook or just think about how these ideas relate to your own life. Learning English becomes so much more meaningful when we connect it to our personal experiences and emotions. And remember, you can always find the complete transcript of this episode on our website, along with reflection questions and vocabulary lists. If something we discussed today touches your heart or sparks an idea, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out through our website or social media. Your stories and insights always inspire me and our entire community. So, are you ready to embark on this journey of discovery together? Let's dive in. Let's start with something that I think every single person listening to this can relate to: failure. Now, I know that might not sound like the most uplifting way to begin, but stick with me here, because I truly believe that learning to embrace failure is one of the most liberating and transformative things you can do in your life. My personal story of failure. I want to share something very personal with you. When I was 25 years old, I thought I had my entire life figured out. I had what looked like a perfect job at a prestigious marketing company in London. I was earning good money, I had a nice apartment, and from the outside, everything looked successful. But here's the truth. I was absolutely miserable. Every morning, I would wake up with this heavy feeling in my chest, dreading the day ahead. I felt like I was living someone else's life, following a path that society told me was successful, but that made me feel empty inside. The breaking point came during what I now call the presentation disaster. I was supposed to present a major campaign to one of our biggest clients. I had prepared for weeks, everything was perfect on paper. But when I stood up in that conference room, something inside me just broke. I started crying in the middle of my presentation. Not just a few tears, I'm talking about full-on sobbing in front of 20 important business executives. I was mortified. I apologized, excused myself, and basically ran out of the building. That night, I was convinced my career was over. I felt like such a failure, like I had ruined everything I had worked so hard to build. But you know what? That moment of complete breakdown became the catalyst for the most positive change in my life. Redefining failure. That experience taught me something crucial. What we call failure is often just life's way of redirecting us towards something better. That breakdown in the conference room wasn't really a failure. It was my authentic self finally saying, "This isn't who you're meant to be." Within 6 months of that incident, I had quit my job, enrolled in a teaching certification program, and started planning my move to different countries to teach English. My friends and family thought I had lost my mind. They kept asking, "Why would you give up such a good job?" But for the first time in years, I felt alive. Now, 7 years later, I can honestly say that failing at that presentation was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It forced me to confront the fact that I was living a life that wasn't authentic to who I really was. The fear of making mistakes. One thing I've noticed, especially with my English students, is how paralyzed we become by the fear of making mistakes. In language learning, this fear is particularly destructive because making mistakes is literally how we learn. But this fear extends far beyond language learning. It affects every area of our lives. I remember one of my students, Maria, who was incredibly intelligent and had excellent English grammar knowledge, but in conversation classes, she would barely speak. When I asked her why, she said, "Emma, I'm so afraid of saying something wrong. What if people laugh at me? What if I sound stupid?" We spent weeks working on this mindset. I shared my own embarrassing language mistakes, like the time I accidentally told a group of Spanish speakers that I was embarazada, pregnant, instead of avergonzada when I made a mistake. Everyone burst out laughing, and initially I was mortified, but then I realized that mistake made everyone more relaxed, it created a moment of connection and humor, and I never forgot the correct word again. Maria gradually began to understand that her mistakes were actually opportunities for connection and learning. By the end of the course, she was one of the most confident speakers in the class. The growth mindset. This brings me to one of the most important concepts I've learned, the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. With a fixed mindset, we believe our abilities are static. We're either good at something or we're not. With a growth mindset, we believe our abilities can be developed through effort, learning, and persistence. When you have a fixed mindset, failure feels devastating because it seems to prove that you're not good enough. But when you have a growth mindset, failure becomes valuable feedback that helps you improve. I've seen this transformation in so many of my students. Instead of saying, "I'm terrible at English," they start saying, "I'm not good at this yet, but I'm learning." That simple word, yet, changes everything. Learning from setbacks. Let me tell you about another pivotal moment in my life. About 3 years ago, I decided to start my own online English teaching business. I had big dreams. I was going to help thousands of students around the world, create amazing courses, and build something really meaningful. I invested all my savings, worked 80-hour weeks for months, and launched what I thought was going to be an incredible program. And it completely flopped. I had exactly 3 students sign up. 3! I was devastated and financially stressed. For weeks, I wallowed in self-pity. I felt like a fraud, like I had been delusional to think I could build something successful. But then I forced myself to really analyze what had gone wrong. I reached out to potential students and asked for honest feedback. I studied successful online educators and tried to understand what they were doing differently. What I discovered was humbling, but incredibly valuable. My content was good, but I hadn't really understood my audience. I was creating what I thought people needed instead of what they actually wanted. I was so focused on being professional that I had lost the personal connection that made my in-person teaching effective. So I started over. This time, I focused on building genuine relationships with my potential students. I shared more of my own struggles and vulnerabilities. I created content that addressed their real concerns and challenges, not just what textbooks said they should learn. The second version of my business was completely different from the first, and it was successful in ways I had never imagined. But more importantly, the failure of my first attempt taught me lessons about empathy, authenticity, and resilience that I never could have learned any other way. The perfectionism trap. One of the biggest obstacles to embracing failure is perfectionism. Perfectionism isn't about having high standards, it's about being so afraid of not being perfect that you don't try at all, or you don't put yourself in situations where you might fail. I used to be a terrible perfectionist. I would spend hours rewriting emails because I was worried they weren't perfect. I would avoid trying new things because I might not be immediately good at them. I would procrastinate on important projects because I was afraid they wouldn't meet my impossibly high standards. But perfectionism is actually a form of fear. It's fear disguised as high standards. And the ironic thing about perfectionism is that it often prevents us from achieving excellence because we're so afraid of being imperfect that we never really try. Learning to embrace good enough was incredibly liberating for me. Now, instead of spending 3 hours crafting the perfect email, I write a good email and send it. Instead of avoiding new challenges, I try things I might fail at. And you know what? Most of the time, good enough is actually pretty great. Building resilience. Resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks, is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And the only way to build resilience is to face challenges and failures and learn to recover from them. I think about some of the most successful and happy people I know, and they all have one thing in common. They've failed many times, but they've learned to see failure as a teacher rather than an enemy. There's a Japanese concept called nana korobi yaoki, which means fall down 7 times, stand up 8. I love this because it acknowledges that falling down is inevitable. The important thing is that you get back up one more time than you fall. The gift of vulnerability. One unexpected gift that comes from embracing failure is vulnerability. When you're willing to admit that you don't have all the answers, that you make mistakes, that you're still learning and growing, it creates space for authentic connection with others. Some of my deepest friendships have been forged through shared struggles and vulnerabilities. When I stopped trying to appear perfect and started being honest about my challenges and failures, I found that people related to me more, not less. In my teaching, I've found that students connect with me much more when I share my own language learning struggles than when I try to present myself as an expert who never makes mistakes. Vulnerability breeds trust, and trust is the foundation of all meaningful relationships. Practical strategies for embracing failure. So, how do we practically learn to embrace failure? Here are some strategies that have worked for me and my students. First, reframe failure as feedback. Instead of asking, "Why did I fail?" ask, "What can I learn from this experience?" This simple shift in perspective transforms failure from something shameful into something valuable. Second, celebrate attempts, not just successes. Acknowledge yourself for trying, for putting yourself out there, for taking risks. The courage to try is often more important than the outcome. Third, practice self-compassion. Talk to yourself the way you would talk to a good friend who is going through a difficult time. Be kind, be understanding, be supportive. Fourth, focus on the process, not just the outcome. If you're learning English, celebrate the fact that you had a conversation in English, regardless of how many mistakes you made. If you're trying something new, acknowledge the courage it took to begin, regardless of the immediate results. Finally, remember that failure is temporary, but the lessons you learn are permanent. Every failure teaches you something that success cannot. Now, let's talk about something that I believe is at the heart of a fulfilling life: authentic relationships. You know, in our digital age, we're more connected than ever before, yet many people report feeling lonelier than previous generations. I think this paradox exists because we've confused being connected with being truly known. What makes a relationship authentic? Authentic relationships are built on genuine connection, mutual respect, and the courage to be vulnerable with another person. They're relationships where you can be yourself, not a polished, perfect version of yourself, but your real, imperfect, evolving self. I've learned that the quality of our relationships often determines the quality of our lives. Think about it. Our happiest moments are usually shared with people we care about, and our most difficult times are made bearable by the support of others who truly know us. My journey to understanding friendship. For many years, I thought I was good at making friends. I was social, outgoing, and people seemed to like me. But looking back, I realized that many of my relationships were quite superficial. We would have fun together, share laughs, and enjoy each other's company, but we rarely went deeper than surface-level conversations. This hit me during a particularly difficult period in my life. My father had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and I was struggling emotionally. I needed support, but I realized I didn't know how to ask for it. I had trained myself to always be the positive, upbeat person who had everything together. The idea of showing vulnerability or admitting that I was struggling felt terrifying. I remember sitting alone in my apartment one evening, feeling overwhelmed and sad, thinking about all the people in my phone contacts who would probably describe me as a friend. But I couldn't think of anyone I felt comfortable calling to say, "I'm not okay, and I need someone to talk to." That realization was a wake-up call. I had many acquaintances and fun social connections, but very few people who truly knew me, the real me, with all my fears, insecurities, and struggles. The courage to be vulnerable. This experience taught me that authentic relationships require vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage. We have to be willing to let people see us as we really are, not just as we want to be perceived. I started small. With a few close friends, I began sharing more honestly about what was going on in my life. Instead of always saying, "I'm fine," when asked how I was doing, I started giving real answers. Instead of only sharing my successes and happy moments, I began to open up about my struggles and uncertainties. The response surprised me. Rather than being put off by my vulnerability, people responded with their own openness. They shared their own struggles, fears, and insecurities. Our conversations became deeper, more meaningful, and more connected. One friend, Sarah, told me later, "Emma, I always admired you because you seemed to have everything figured out. But when you started being real with me about your struggles, I felt so much closer to you. It made me realize that I could be real with you too." Listening as an act of love. One of the most important skills in building authentic relationships is deep listening. Not listening to respond, not listening to give advice, but listening to truly understand another person. I'll be honest, this was challenging for me at first. I was used to being the person who always had solutions, who could fix problems and make people feel better. But I learned that sometimes people don't need solutions. They need to be heard, understood, and validated. I remember a conversation with my friend David, who was going through a divorce. He was telling me about how difficult everything was, and my instinct was to jump in with advice and suggestions. But instead, I forced myself to just listen. I asked questions like, "How does that feel?" and "What has that been like for you?" instead of "Have you tried?" or "You should." At the end of our conversation, David said, "Thank you for listening. I don't need someone to fix the situation. I just needed someone to understand what I'm going through." That taught me that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is our full, undivided attention. The art of asking questions. Authentic relationships flourish when we become genuinely curious about other people's inner worlds. This means asking questions that go beyond "How was your day?" or "What do you do for work?" Some of my most meaningful conversations have started with questions like, "What's bringing you joy these days? What's been challenging for you lately? What are you learning about yourself right now? What dreams are you working toward? What do you wish more people understood about you?" These kinds of questions invite people to share more deeply about their experiences, thoughts, and feelings. They signal that you're interested in them as a whole person, not just the surface-level details of their life. Boundaries and self-respect. While vulnerability and openness are important for authentic relationships, I've also learned that healthy boundaries are equally crucial. Authentic doesn't mean sharing everything with everyone, and it doesn't mean accepting poor treatment from others. I used to confuse being nice with being authentic. I would say yes to things I didn't want to do, tolerate behavior that made me uncomfortable, and prioritize other people's needs over my own. I thought this made me a good friend, but actually, it made me resentful and prevented me from having honest relationships. Learning to set boundaries was one of the most important relationship skills I ever developed. It meant learning to say no without feeling guilty, expressing my needs and preferences clearly, and ending relationships that were consistently draining or unhealthy. I remember one friendship that was particularly difficult. This person would constantly complain about their life, but never take any steps to improve their situation. They would call me at all hours to vent, but when I tried to share my own challenges, they would quickly change the subject back to themselves. For months, I felt obligated to be available whenever they needed me, because I thought that's what a good friend does. But eventually, I realized that this relationship was one-sided and emotionally exhausting. Setting boundaries meant limiting our contact and being honest about what I could and couldn't offer in the friendship. It was uncomfortable, but it freed up emotional energy for relationships that were more balanced and mutually supportive. The challenge of making adult friendships. One thing I've noticed is that making deep friendships as an adult can be particularly challenging. When we're children and teenagers, we're thrown together with peers in school settings, and we have lots of unstructured time to develop relationships naturally. As adults, our social circles often become more limited. We might interact primarily with coworkers, family members, and a few established friends. Meeting new people and developing new friendships requires more intentional effort. I found that the best adult friendships often develop around shared activities or interests. Some of my closest friends today are people I met in hiking groups, volunteer organizations, language exchange programs, and hobby clubs. The key is being open to connection and taking the initiative to move relationships from acquaintance level to friendship level. This might mean inviting someone for coffee after a class you attend together, or suggesting a weekend activity with a coworker you enjoy talking to. Cultural differences in friendship. Teaching English to students from different cultures has taught me so much about how friendship is understood and expressed differently around the world. In some cultures, friendships are expected to be lifelong commitments with deep loyalty and frequent contact. In others, friendships can be more casual and situational. Some cultures emphasize group harmony and may be less direct about disagreements, while others value individual expression and honest communication even when it's uncomfortable. Understanding these differences has made me more patient and flexible in my relationships with people from different backgrounds. I remember one student, Kenji from Japan, who told me he was confused by American friendship culture. He said, "Americans seem to become friends very quickly and call many people their friends, but then the relationships don't seem very deep. In Japan, we are more careful about using the word friend, but when someone is your friend, it's a very serious commitment." This conversation made me reflect on my own approach to friendship and helped me understand why some of my international friendships had developed differently than I expected. Digital communication and real connection. We can't talk about modern relationships without addressing the role of technology. Social media, texting, and video calls have given us new ways to stay connected, but they've also created new challenges for authentic relationship building. On one hand, technology allows us to maintain relationships across distances and time zones that would have been impossible in previous generations. I have meaningful friendships with people I met while teaching in different countries, and we stay in touch through regular video calls and messages. On the other hand, digital communication can sometimes substitute for deeper connection. It's easy to think we're maintaining relationships by liking someone's social media posts or sending occasional text messages, but these interactions don't necessarily create the kind of intimacy that comes from face-to-face conversation. I've tried to be intentional about using technology to enhance rather than replace real connection. This means prioritizing video calls over text messages, having phone conversations instead of just exchanging written messages, and making sure that my most important relationships include regular in-person time. The ripple effect of authentic relationships. One beautiful thing about developing authentic relationships is the ripple effect it creates. When you model vulnerability, deep listening, and genuine care in your relationships, it encourages others to do the same. You become part of creating a culture of authenticity in your social circles. I've noticed this in my friend groups. As I've become more open and vulnerable, others have followed suit. Our conversations have become more meaningful, our support for each other has become more substantial, and our gatherings have become more fulfilling. This extends beyond personal friendships, too. In my teaching, when I'm authentic and vulnerable with my students, it creates a classroom environment where everyone feels safer to take risks, make mistakes, and be themselves. This leads to better learning outcomes and more enjoyable experiences for everyone. Maintaining long-distance friendships. Since I've lived in different countries and my friends are scattered around the world, I've had to learn how to maintain meaningful relationships across distances. This requires more intentional effort than local friendships, but it's absolutely possible. Some strategies that have worked for me include scheduling regular video calls, even if they're short, sending voice messages instead of just text so friends can hear your tone and emotion, sharing photos and updates about daily life, not just major events, planning visits when possible, even if infrequent, being understanding about time zone differences and varying communication preferences, making an effort to remember important events and check in during difficult times. One of my dearest friends, Lisa, lives in Australia while I'm currently based in Europe. We have a standing monthly video call, and we also send each other voice messages throughout the month. When one of us is going through something difficult, we make extra effort to connect more frequently. Even though we only see each other in person once a year or so, our friendship remains strong and meaningful. The importance of community. Beyond individual friendships, I've learned how important it is to have a sense of community, a network of people who know you and care about your well-being. This might include family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, or members of organizations you belong to. Having a community provides a sense of belonging and support that's difficult to achieve through individual relationships alone. It also gives you opportunities to contribute to others' lives and feel valued for what you bring to the group. Since moving to different countries, I've had to build new communities multiple times. This has taught me that community doesn't just happen, it requires active participation and investment. You have to show up, contribute, and care about others to receive care in return. For our final segment today, I want to talk about something that I think many of us struggle with at different points in our lives: finding our purpose and having the courage to follow our dreams. This is especially relevant for English learners because often learning a new language is connected to bigger dreams and goals. The myth of the single purpose. Let me start by addressing a common misconception that caused me a lot of anxiety for years: the idea that everyone has one true purpose or calling in life and that we need to find it in order to be happy and successful. For the longest time, I tortured myself trying to figure out what my purpose was. I would read articles about people who knew from childhood that they wanted to be doctors or artists or teachers, and I felt like something was wrong with me. I tried career aptitude tests, personality assessments, and even consulted with life coaches, all hoping someone would tell me what I was meant to do with my life. But the more I searched for this magical purpose, the more confused and frustrated I became. It wasn't until my late 20s that I realized I had been thinking about purpose all wrong. Purpose isn't necessarily one specific career or goal that you discover and then pursue for the rest of your life. For many people, purpose evolves and changes as we grow and learn more about ourselves and the world. My winding path. My own path is a perfect example of this. If you had told me 10 years ago that I would be teaching English and creating educational content, I would have laughed. At that time, I was convinced that success meant climbing the corporate ladder in business. But looking back, I can see how each phase of my life contributed to where I am now. My business experience taught me about project management, marketing, and working with clients. My struggles with that career path taught me about the importance of authenticity creativity and following your values. My travels and language learning experiences gave me empathy for the challenges that English learners face. None of these experiences seemed directly related to my current work at the time, but they all contributed to preparing me for what I'm doing now. It's like Steve Jobs said in his famous speech, "You can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backward." The difference between dreams and fantasies. One important distinction I've learned to make is between dreams and fantasies. Dreams are goals that inspire you and that you're willing to work toward even when the path is difficult. Fantasies are appealing ideas that you enjoy thinking about but aren't actually prepared to pursue with sustained effort. For example, I used to fantasize about being a famous novelist. I loved the idea of writing beautiful books that would touch people's hearts and maybe even win awards. But when I really examined this fantasy, I realized that I wasn't actually willing to do the daily work of writing consistently, dealing with rejection, and learning the craft of storytelling. On the other hand, my dream of helping people learn English and connect across cultures was something I was willing to work toward, even when it was challenging, even when it meant taking pay cuts, even when it required learning new skills and stepping outside my comfort zone. The key question is, what are you willing to suffer for? Every dream comes with difficulties. The dreams worth pursuing are the ones where you're willing to embrace the challenges because the goal means so much to you. Starting before you're ready. One of the biggest obstacles to following our dreams is the belief that we need to have everything figured out before we begin. We think we need to have a perfect plan, all the necessary skills, and guaranteed success before we take the first step. But the truth is, you rarely feel ready when opportunities arise. Most of the time, you have to start before you feel ready and figure things out as you go. When I decided to leave my corporate job to become an English teacher, I had no teaching experience, no education degree, and no clear plan for how I would support myself financially. Many people told me I was being irresponsible and that I should get proper training before making such a big change. But I knew that if I waited until I felt completely prepared, I might never start. So I took a basic teaching certification course, applied for teaching positions abroad, and figured out the rest as I went along. Was it scary? Absolutely. Did I make mistakes? Constantly. But I learned more in my first year of teaching than I could have learned in any classroom or training program because I was learning through real experience. The role of passion versus curiosity. There's a lot of pressure in our culture to follow your passion, but I've come to believe that following your curiosity is often more practical and sustainable than following your passion. Passion can be intense but inconsistent. You might feel passionate about something one day and indifferent the next. Curiosity, on the other hand, is more sustainable and can lead you to discoveries you never expected. I wasn't passionate about teaching when I started. I was curious about it. I was curious about different cultures, curious about how people learn languages, curious about what it would be like to live in other countries. That curiosity led me down a path that eventually became a deep passion. Many of my most successful students have followed a similar pattern. They started learning English not because they were passionate about grammar and vocabulary, but because they were curious about other cultures, interested in traveling, or attracted to opportunities that required English skills. Dealing with other people's opinions. One of the most challenging aspects of following your dreams is dealing with other people's opinions and expectations. Well-meaning friends and family members often have strong opinions about what you should do with your life, and these opinions are usually based on their own fears and values rather than what's right for you. When I left my corporate job, the reactions from my social circle were mixed, to say the least. Some people were supportive and encouraging, but others were openly critical. I heard comments like, "You're throwing away your career. You'll never make good money as a teacher. What will you do when you get older and want to settle down? You're being selfish and irresponsible." These comments hurt, especially when they came from people I cared about. For a while, I started to doubt my decision and wonder if everyone else was right and I was making a huge mistake. But eventually, I realized that most of these comments said more about other people's fears than about my actual situation. People who had chosen security over satisfaction were projecting their own regrets onto my situation. People who had never taken big risks couldn't understand why I would want to. I learned to listen politely to advice, but to make decisions based on my own values and intuition rather than other people's expectations. The importance of small steps. Big dreams can feel overwhelming, which often leads to procrastination or giving up before you start. I've found that the key to making progress on meaningful goals is breaking them down into small, manageable steps that you can take consistently. When I first started creating online English content, my dream was to help thousands of students around the world improve their English skills. That goal felt so big that I didn't know where to start. So I broke it down. First, I would create one helpful video. Then, I would share it with 10 people and ask for feedback. Then, I would create another video based on what I learned. Then, I would start building an email list of interested learners, and so on. Each step was small enough that it didn't feel overwhelming, but together, these small steps gradually build toward my bigger goal. This approach works for any goal. Want to write a book? Start by writing 1 page a day. Want to learn a new skill? Commit to practicing for 15 minutes daily. Want to change careers? Start by taking one small course or having one informational interview. The magic happens in the accumulation of small, consistent actions over time. Redefining success. Society often defines success in narrow terms: money, status, recognition, material possessions. But I've learned that true success is much more personal and individual than that. For me, success means living in alignment with my values, having meaningful relationships, contributing positively to other people's lives, and continuing to grow and learn as a person. Financial stability is important, but it's not the primary measure of whether my life is successful. This redefinition of success has been incredibly liberating. It means I can pursue goals that are meaningful to me without constantly comparing myself to other people's achievements or worrying about whether I'm meeting external expectations of success. I encourage all my students to think about what success means to them personally. For some, it might mean being able to communicate confidently with international colleagues. For others, it might mean being able to help their children with homework in English. For others, it might mean having the language skills to travel independently. There's no right or wrong definition of success. The important thing is that your goals are aligned with your own values and aspirations rather than someone else's. The role of failure in achieving dreams. We've already talked about embracing failure, but I want to specifically address how failure relates to pursuing your dreams. Every person who has achieved something meaningful has also experienced significant failures along the way. The difference between people who achieve their dreams and people who don't isn't that the successful people never fail, it's that they don't let failure stop them from continuing to try. When my first online business failed, I had a choice. I could see it as proof that I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship, or I could see it as valuable education that would help me succeed the next time. I chose the second perspective, and it made all the difference. Each failure taught me something important about my audience, about marketing, about product development, about myself. The lessons I learned from failing were often more valuable than the lessons I learned from succeeding. Finding your tribe. Pursuing your dreams becomes much easier when you find your tribe, people who share your values, understand your goals, and support your journey. These might be people who are pursuing similar dreams, or they might just be people who believe in taking risks and following your heart. For me, finding my tribe meant connecting with other teachers, travelers, and entrepreneurs who understood the unconventional path I had chosen. These relationships provided encouragement during difficult times, practical advice when I faced challenges, and celebration when I achieved milestones. Sometimes your tribe includes people you know in person, and sometimes it includes people you connect with online or in professional communities. The important thing is having people in your life who understand and support your dreams, especially when others might not. The evolution of dreams. Finally, I want to acknowledge that dreams can and should evolve as you grow and change as a person. The goals that inspire you at 25 might be different from the goals that inspire you at 35 or 45, and that's perfectly normal and healthy. I used to think that changing your goals meant you were inconsistent or didn't have enough commitment, but now I see it as a sign of growth and self-awareness. As you learn more about yourself and the world, it makes sense that your aspirations would evolve too. The key is to stay connected to your core values and to what brings you joy and fulfillment, even as the specific expression of those values might change over time. Wow, we've covered so much ground together today. As we come to the end of our time, I want to take a moment to reflect on the journey we've taken and how these life lessons connect to your English learning journey. Bringing it all together. Today, we explored 3 powerful themes: embracing failure as a teacher, building authentic relationships through vulnerability, and finding the courage to pursue your dreams. These might seem like separate topics, but they're actually deeply interconnected. The courage to embrace failure makes it easier to be vulnerable in relationships because you're less afraid of being judged. Being vulnerable in relationships provides the support and encouragement you need to pursue your dreams. And pursuing your dreams often requires both the willingness to fail and the support of authentic relationships. For English learners. As English learners, you have the opportunity to apply all of these lessons in your language journey. Learning a language requires embracing failure. You will make mistakes, you will have conversations that don't go as planned, you will face moments of frustration and confusion. But each of these experiences is teaching you something valuable. Building authentic relationships through English opens up a world of connections with people from different cultures and backgrounds. When you're willing to be vulnerable, to make mistakes, to ask for help, to share your real thoughts and feelings even when your grammar isn't perfect, you create opportunities for genuine connection. And for many of you, learning English is connected to bigger dreams. Dreams of studying abroad, working internationally, traveling independently, or simply expanding your worldview. These dreams are worth pursuing, even when the path is challenging. Personal reflection questions. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to leave you with some questions for personal reflection. You don't need to answer these now, but consider thinking about them over the coming days. What is one area of your life where fear of failure is holding you back? How could you bring more authenticity and vulnerability to your relationships? What dreams or goals have you been putting off because you don't feel ready? How can you apply these lessons to your English learning journey? A personal message. I want to end today with a personal message. Wherever you are in your life journey, whatever challenges you're facing, whatever dreams you're nurturing, remember that you have everything within you that you need to create a meaningful, fulfilling life. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to wait until you feel ready. You just need to be willing to begin, to try, to be vulnerable, to learn from your experiences, and to keep moving forward. Your willingness to learn English, to listen to podcasts like this, to invest in your personal growth, these are signs that you're already on the right path. Trust yourself, be patient with the process, and remember that every small step you take is moving you closer to the life you want to create. Thank you, and next week. Thank you so much for spending this hour with me today. Your presence, your attention, and your willingness to grow mean more to me than you know. Creating this content and connecting with learners like you is one of the greatest joys of my life. Next week, we'll be exploring the topic of creativity and how to nurture your creative spirit, even if you don't consider yourself an artistic person. We'll talk about the role of creativity in problem solving, the importance of play in adult life, and how expressing yourself creatively can enhance your English learning. Don't forget to check out our website for the transcript of today's episode, reflection questions, and vocabulary practice. And if today's conversation touched your heart or sparked any insights, I'd love to hear from you. Your stories and reflections always inspire me and help me create better content for our community. Until next week, be kind to yourself, embrace the journey, and remember, you are capable of amazing things. This is Emma, sending you love and encouragement from wherever you are in the world. Take care.
Welcome back to the Artificial Fluency Podcast. I'm Emma. And in today's episode, we'll practice improving your English listening and writing skills through real-life stories. Listening to these stories will help you understand how English is used in everyday situations, making your learning more practical and engaging. Whether you're at home, in class, or on the go, listening to these examples will give you a better grasp of the language. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Every day we upload new videos to help you improve your English skills step by step. Now, let's get into today's story. I want to share a story about my friend Sarah, who once had to make a big decision in her life. She was living in a small town and working at a local bookstore. One day, she received an offer to move to the city and work for a larger company. It was a dream job, but she was unsure about leaving her comfort zone. Sarah knew that if she stayed, she would continue her quiet, simple life. But if she moved to the city, things would be different. She would meet new people, have more opportunities, and probably be much busier. At first, Sarah felt nervous. But after thinking it over, she realized that staying in her comfort zone wouldn't help her grow. She decided to take the job in the city. The first few months were challenging. New place, new people, new routine. But after a while, Sarah started to feel at home. She made new friends, learned new things, and most importantly, she grew as a person. This story teaches us that sometimes we have to take risks to move forward in life. It's not always easy, but the experience helps us grow and become more confident. Let's talk about another story, this time about a man named John. John is an engineer, and he had worked at the same company for almost 10 years. He was really good at his job, but recently, he felt like he wasn't learning anything new. One day, his manager asked him to lead a new project. John was excited but also nervous because he had never been in charge of a project before. He wasn't sure if he could do it, but his manager believed in him. John took the challenge seriously. He spent long hours reading, researching, and meeting with the team. Slowly, he began to feel more confident. As the project progressed, he noticed that he was developing new skills that he didn't know he had. By the time the project was completed, it was a huge success, and John had learned so much. The lesson from John's story is that taking on new responsibilities can push us out of our comfort zones, but it's through these challenges that we learn and grow. It's important to embrace opportunities, even when they seem a little scary. Next, let's talk about another story I personally experienced. A few years ago, I went on a hiking trip with some friends. We were in a forest, surrounded by nature. Everything was beautiful. But as the day went on, the weather turned cloudy and the temperature dropped. We were far from the nearest town, and it was getting darker. We were nervous, but we kept moving forward. We trusted our guide and kept following the path. After a while, the weather cleared up, and we made it to the top of a hill just as the sun was setting. It was one of the most beautiful sights I had ever seen. Looking back, I realized that the journey wasn't just about reaching the top, it was about facing the challenges along the way. The journey taught me to be patient and trust the process. This story shows that in life, we often face difficulties, but it's the challenges that make the reward at the end even more worthwhile. Let me share another story with you. This one is about David, a small business owner. David runs a bakery in his town. He wakes up early every morning to bake fresh bread, cakes, and pastries. His bakery is well known in the neighborhood, and people love his food. But a few months ago, David faced a big problem. A new bakery opened just down the street, and many of his customers started going there. At first, David felt discouraged. He had worked so hard for years, and now he was losing customers. But instead of giving He decided to make some changes. He started asking his regular customers what they liked most about his bakery. Some said they loved the fresh bread, while others said they enjoyed the friendly service. This gave David an idea. He decided to focus on what made his bakery special. He started making new types of bread with different flavors. He also gave small free samples to new customers. Slowly, people started coming back. They realized that David's bakery had something unique: delicious homemade food and a warm, friendly atmosphere. This story teaches us an important lesson. When we face problems, we should not give up. Instead, we should find ways to improve and make the best of the situation. Now, let me tell you about Emily, a student preparing for an important exam. Emily was always a hardworking student, but this exam was different. It was more difficult than anything she had done before, and she felt overwhelmed. She didn't know where to start, and the more she thought about it, the more stressed she became. One day, Emily's teacher gave her some advice. He told her to break her study time into small parts. Instead of trying to study everything at once, she should focus on one topic at a time. Emily followed this advice. She made a study schedule and took short breaks between study sessions. She also started writing down key points to help her remember important information. As the exam day came closer, Emily felt more prepared. She wasn't as nervous as before because she had a clear plan. When she finally took the exam, she did well. Emily's story shows us that when we have a big task, it's better to take it step by step. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, we can make a plan and work through it slowly. This method helps not only with studying but also with many other challenges in life. Now, let's talk about another real-life situation. A man named Robert wanted to improve his health. He had been feeling tired all the time, and he knew he needed to make some changes. At first, he thought he had to do everything at once: exercise every day, eat only healthy food, and completely change his lifestyle. But after a few days, he felt exhausted and gave up. Then, Robert decided to take a different approach. Instead of changing everything at once, he started with small steps. First, he began going for short walks in the evening. Then, he added more vegetables to his meals. Slowly, he built better habits. Over time, he had more energy and felt much better. His story teaches us an important lesson. When we want to improve something, we don't have to do everything at once. Small, consistent changes are often more effective than big, sudden changes. Let me share another personal experience. A few years ago, I traveled to a different country for the first time. It was exciting, but also a little scary because I didn't know the language very well. At first, I felt nervous about talking to people. I worried about making mistakes or not understanding what they said. But then I realized that most people were friendly and patient. When I didn't know a word, I used gestures or tried to explain in a simple way. With time, my confidence grew, and I started speaking more naturally. By the end of the trip, I felt much more comfortable using the language. Now let me share a much longer and more detailed story, one that will help you think about how small changes can make a big impact in your life. This is the story of my friend James, who was a manager at a local restaurant. James loved his job. He enjoyed helping his team and serving the customers. But over time, he noticed that things weren't going as well as before. The restaurant used to be busy every day, but now it seemed that fewer people were coming in. The staff seemed tired, and the customers didn't always leave satisfied. At first, James wasn't sure what was causing the problem. The food was still great, and the staff was friendly. He decided to spend a few days observing everything, watching how customers were treated, seeing how the kitchen worked, and listening to what the staff had to say. One day, while talking to the waiters, James discovered that they felt overwhelmed because they didn't have enough time to check on every customer. The kitchen staff, too, was struggling to keep up with the orders. As James thought about it, he realized that the problem wasn't the food or the service. It was the way the restaurant was organized. There wasn't enough communication between the kitchen and the waiters, and there was no clear plan to manage the rush hours. James knew he had to make some changes. The first thing he did was improve the communication between the kitchen and the waiters. They set up a system where the waiters could update the kitchen quickly when a new order came in. This way, the kitchen could prepare food faster, and the waiters would know exactly when the food was ready. Next, James worked with his team to organize the shifts better. He made sure there were enough people working during busy times, and he also trained the staff on how to manage stress during peak hours. The result? The restaurant started to get busier again. Customers were happy because the food came out faster and the waiters had more time to check on them. The staff felt more organized and less stressed. James also noticed that the team worked better together because they had clearer communication. This story is a great example of how small changes in how we organize our time and communicate with others can have a big impact on our success. It's not always about working harder, it's about working smarter. James didn't need to make big, expensive changes. He just needed to listen to his team and think about how they could work together more efficiently. Let me tell you another story, this time about a woman named Alice, who wanted to become a better writer. Alice had always enjoyed writing, but she struggled with expressing her thoughts clearly on paper. She would start writing, but often got stuck in the middle of her sentences. Her ideas were there, but she found it hard to put them into words. At first, Alice was frustrated because no matter how much she practiced, she couldn't seem to improve. She read a lot of books, took online courses, and even joined writing groups. But something still wasn't working. One day, Alice decided to take a different approach. Instead of focusing only on writing, she started paying more attention to how people talk to each other in everyday conversations. Alice realized that when people talked, they didn't always use perfect grammar or follow strict writing rules. They used simple words, short sentences, and sometimes even incomplete thoughts, but they still communicated effectively. Inspired by this, Alice started writing the way people speak. She didn't worry too much about grammar at first. Instead, she focused on writing as if she were telling a story to a friend. Over time, Alice noticed a big difference. Her writing became more natural and easier to read. She wasn't just trying to follow writing rules anymore, she was telling a story in a way that felt real and personal. Alice's advice to other writers is simple. Don't be afraid to write like you talk. The more you practice this, the more comfortable and confident you'll become in your writing. This story is important because it teaches us that sometimes we need to change our approach to learning. If one method doesn't work, it might be helpful to try something new. Alice's story also shows us that making small changes in how we think about writing can lead to big improvements. Now, let's move to another example about a young man named Mark, who was trying to get a job after graduating from university. Mark had a degree in business management and he was excited to start his career. However, after applying to many jobs and going to several interviews, Mark wasn't having any luck. He started to feel discouraged and wondered if there was something wrong with his resume or his approach. One day, Mark decided to ask a mentor for advice. His mentor was a successful business owner, and Mark hoped he could help him. After looking at Mark's resume and hearing about his interview experiences, the mentor pointed out something that Mark hadn't noticed before. Mark wasn't showing enough of his personality in his applications. The mentor explained that many employers are not only looking for someone with the right qualifications, they also want someone who will fit in with their company culture. Mark realized that he had been so focused on showing his skills and achievements that he hadn't taken the time to show his passion for the job or his excitement about working with the team. Taking this advice, Mark updated his resume. He added a section where he explained why he was passionate about working in the business field and what he hoped to achieve in his career. He also practiced answering interview questions in a way that showed more of his personality. Soon after, Mark received a job offer from a company he had interviewed with earlier. They told him that they were impressed by how he demonstrated his enthusiasm and commitment. Mark's story teaches us an important lesson. It's not enough just to show your skills. Employers want to see your personality and how you will fit into their team. This story also shows how a little bit of advice can help us see things from a different perspective. Now, I'll share one more story about how taking small steps towards your goals can create big changes. This story is about my brother, Tom. Tom always wanted to run a marathon. For years, he talked about it but never actually started training. He would make excuses like, "I don't have enough time" or "I'm not fit enough yet." One day, Tom decided to stop making excuses. He started with small steps. Instead of aiming to run the whole marathon right away, he set a goal to run for 10 minutes without stopping. At first it was difficult, but he pushed through and eventually made it. The next week, he increased his time to 20 minutes. Slowly but surely, Tom built up his stamina and confidence. Months later, Tom ran his first marathon. It wasn't easy, and there were times when he felt like giving up. But he had learned that breaking big goals into smaller, manageable steps made them much easier to achieve. Tom's success shows that even the biggest goals are possible if we take them one step at a time. Let's dive even deeper into real-life experiences that can help you improve your listening and writing skills, while also showing how people learn from their challenges. I believe that when we look at different situations, we gain new insights. And that's exactly what I'm going to share with you in this next set of stories. These examples are going to show you how persistence, planning, and changing small things can lead to big results. Let's start with a story about my friend Laura. Laura is a teacher, and she has been teaching at a local school for about 5 years. At first, she loved her job. She enjoyed interacting with students, creating lesson plans, and seeing her students succeed. But over time, she started to feel burned out. The workload kept increasing, and the students were becoming more distracted. Laura didn't feel the same excitement she once had. She wasn't sure what was wrong, but she felt tired and frustrated. One day, after a particularly stressful week, Laura spoke with a fellow teacher who had been teaching for much longer. This teacher shared some advice that changed everything for Laura. Sometimes you need to step back and take care of yourself before you can take care of your students. The more Laura thought about it, the more she realized that she had been putting everyone else's needs before her own. She didn't take enough time for herself, and that's why she felt exhausted. Laura decided to make some changes. First, she began to prioritize her well-being. She started taking short breaks throughout the day to clear her mind. She also began practicing mindfulness, focusing on breathing exercises and spending time outdoors. As a result, she felt more energized and positive. Laura also started setting clearer boundaries, making sure she didn't take work home every day. By the end of the semester, she noticed that her teaching had improved. Her students were more engaged, and she felt more fulfilled in her work. This story shows us that in order to give our best, we need to take care of ourselves first. It's easy to forget this, but self-care is an essential part of success, both personally and professionally. Laura's experience also teaches us that sometimes we have to change our approach to our daily routines to feel more energized and focused. Now let me tell you about another inspiring story. This one is about a man named Sam. Sam always wanted to write a book, He had the idea for years but never found the time or motivation to start. He'd tell himself, "I'm too busy," or "I don't have enough experience." But every time he watched an interview with a successful author, he would feel inspired. He knew he had a story to tell, but something always stopped him from actually writing it. One day, after hearing a motivational speaker talk about the importance of consistency, Sam decided to change his approach. Instead of setting a huge goal like write a book, he broke the process down into small, achievable steps. Sam started by writing just 500 words a day. It wasn't much, but it was something he could manage. Some days he would write more, and other days, less. But no matter what, he made sure to write at least 500 words. Over time, Sam built a routine. He would wake up early and spend the first hour of his day writing. As weeks went by, his manuscript started to take shape. It wasn't perfect, but it was real progress. After 6 months, Sam finished the first draft of his book. He was thrilled. It wasn't easy, but the small daily habit of writing made a huge difference. Sam's story teaches us that big goals don't need to be overwhelming. Breaking them down into smaller steps can help us stay focused and motivated. It also shows that consistency is key to achieving success, even if it's just a little bit at a time. Let me share another experience, this time from a woman named Karen, who wanted to improve her public speaking skills. Karen had always been a little nervous about speaking in front of people. She avoided presentations at work and preferred to communicate through emails or messages. But one day, her boss asked her to present a new project to a group of colleagues. Karen was terrified. She didn't know how to prepare, and she feared that she would mess up. Instead of saying no, Karen decided to face her fear. She knew that public speaking was a skill she could improve, and avoiding it would only make it harder. So, Karen took a deep breath and started practicing. She recorded herself speaking, watched the recordings, and noted areas where she could improve. She also asked a friend to watch her practice presentations and give feedback. The more Karen practiced, the more confident she became. On the day of the presentation, she still felt nervous, but she had prepared well. She spoke clearly, made eye contact with her audience, and even smiled. After the presentation, her colleagues praised her for the clear and confident delivery. Karen's experience teaches us that we don't have to be perfect right away. We can improve any skill with enough practice and patience. If we face our fears instead of avoiding them, we grow stronger and more capable. Now let's hear a story about a man named Jack, who wanted to get fit and healthy. Jack had always struggled with his weight. He would try different diets and exercise routines, but nothing seemed to work in the long term. He often felt like giving up, especially when he didn't see results right away. One day, Jack realized something important. He had been focusing too much on the end goal, losing a certain amount of weight or fitting into a smaller size. He realized that these big goals were overwhelming and made him feel like he wasn't progressing. Instead of focusing on the number on the scale, Jack decided to change his mindset. He would focus on building healthy habits instead. He started by drinking more water, getting more sleep, and eating healthier foods. Jack also started going for short walks every day. At first, he could only walk for 15 minutes, but gradually he built up his stamina. Over the next few months, Jack lost weight, but more importantly, he felt healthier and more energized. The changes he made weren't drastic, but they were consistent. Jack's story teaches us that health is not just about reaching a certain number on the scale. It's about making sustainable changes that we can keep for the long term. Small, healthy habits can lead to big improvements over time. Let me share another story about a woman named Jessica who had been struggling with procrastination. Jessica was a university student, And like many students, she often left assignments until the last minute. This habit caused her a lot of stress, especially when deadlines were approaching. She knew that she needed to change her behavior, but every time she promised herself to start earlier, she would find something else to do, like checking social media or watching videos. One day, Jessica's professor gave her some advice that changed everything. He told her to break down her assignments into smaller tasks. Instead of thinking, "I have to write a 10-page essay," Jessica could focus on writing just one paragraph at a time. This made the task seem much less overwhelming. Jessica also started using a timer to stay focused. She would set a timer for 25 minutes to work, then take a 5-minute break. This technique, called the Pomodoro technique, helped her stay focused and productive. Over time, Jessica became much better at managing her time. She no longer procrastinated, and her grades improved. Jessica's story shows us that procrastination is a common problem, but we can overcome it by breaking tasks down into smaller pieces. Time management tools, like the Pomodoro technique, can also be very effective in helping us stay focused. Let's continue with more stories that can help you improve your listening and writing skills. These stories are full of lessons, and as you listen to them, you'll notice how different life situations can teach us valuable skills. The more you listen to stories like these, the easier it will become to apply the lessons to your own life. Let's dive deeper into the experiences of people facing everyday challenges and how they learned from them. One story I want to share is about a man named David. David worked as a software engineer in a big company. He was always focused on his work, and he loved solving complex problems. However, he had one issue. He often felt disconnected from his coworkers. David was shy and didn't feel comfortable starting conversations or joining team activities. He thought that focusing on his work would be enough, but he started to realize that this isolation was affecting his job performance and his happiness. One day, during a team meeting, his boss made a comment that stuck with him. She said, "Communication is just as important as technical skills." David thought about it for a long time. He realized that to grow in his career, he needed to work on his communication skills, but he didn't know where to start. David decided to take small steps. The next day, he smiled at his coworkers and said hello. At first, it felt awkward, but soon it became a habit. He also started asking more questions in meetings, not just about work-related topics, but also about his coworkers' weekends or hobbies. Over time, David became more confident in conversations. He was no longer just a quiet engineer in the back of the room. His relationships with his coworkers improved, and so did his teamwork and productivity. David's story shows us that communication is a skill that can be developed with practice. It also teaches us that sometimes the small changes we make can have a big impact on our lives. Next, let me tell you about a woman named Emily, who faced a challenge with time management. Emily was a student, and she often found herself juggling multiple tasks: homework, studying for exams, and spending time with friends. She had big dreams of graduating with honors, but there was one problem: she wasn't very organized. She would often forget deadlines or leave things until the last minute. This made her feel stressed and overwhelmed, and it started affecting her grades. Emily knew she needed to make a change. She decided to invest in a planner and started writing down her tasks for the week. Every Sunday, she would sit down and plan her schedule for the upcoming week. She would list out her assignments, exams, and any social plans. Emily also began setting priorities. She would focus on the most important tasks first, and the smaller tasks could wait. The first few weeks were challenging, but Emily stuck to her new routine. She started feeling more organized, and her stress levels decreased. She began to notice that her grades were improving too. Emily's story teaches us that time management doesn't require major changes. It's about finding the right tools and sticking to a routine. Small steps, like making a weekly plan, can help us be more productive and less stressed. Another story that comes to mind is about a man named Mike, who was passionate about photography. Mike had been taking photos as a hobby for years, but he never thought he could turn it into a career. He had a full-time job in marketing, and he would often take pictures in his free time. But deep down, he felt unfulfilled. Mike knew that photography was something he truly loved, but he lacked the courage to take the next step. One day, Mike went to a photography exhibition. He met a professional photographer there who shared her journey. She explained how she had started by taking pictures for fun, but eventually she began selling her photos online and offering her services to clients. She told Mike, "If you love something, don't wait for the perfect moment. Start now and figure it out as you go." Mike thought about her words for days. Finally, he decided to take a leap of faith. He began by setting up an Instagram account dedicated to his photography. He posted his best photos and began using hashtags to reach a wider audience. It wasn't easy at first. Mike had a few awkward moments, like when he received negative comments or didn't get as many likes as he hoped. But he didn't give up. Over time, Mike started gaining followers, and he began receiving inquiries from people who wanted to hire him for events or photo shoots. Eventually, he was able to quit his marketing job and become a full-time photographer. Mike's story shows us that it's never too late to follow your passions. Even if you're unsure at first, taking small actions towards your goals can lead to big changes. It also teaches us that success doesn't always happen overnight. Let's move on to another inspiring story. This one is about Sarah, a mother of two who is trying to balance her family life and her career. Sarah had always been a hardworking person. She worked as a nurse, and her job required long shifts. While she loved helping others, she often found herself exhausted and drained. Her family felt the strain too, as she didn't have enough time to spend with her children or her husband. One day, Sarah's friend invited her to a weekend retreat focused on personal development. At first, Sarah wasn't sure if she could take the time off, but she realized it might be exactly what she needed. She decided to go, and it turned out to be a life-changing decision. The retreat taught Sarah about the importance of balance. She learned how to set boundaries at work, take breaks during her shifts, and spend more quality time with her family. She also learned to ask for help when she needed it, whether it was from her husband, her parents, or friends. When Sarah returned home, she felt rejuvenated. She started putting some of the retreat's lessons into practice. She set aside weekends for family time, and during the week she made sure to have moments of rest, even if it was just reading a book for 15 minutes. She also learned to say no to extra shifts when she was feeling overwhelmed. Sarah's story teaches us that balance is key to leading a fulfilling life. It shows us that even when life feels busy, it's important to take time for ourselves and prioritize what truly matters. Let me share another story, this time about a woman named Olivia who wanted to improve her public speaking skills. Olivia had always been nervous about speaking in front of a crowd. She was a talented writer and loved expressing herself through words, but when it came to speaking, she would freeze. She knew that public speaking was an important skill, especially in her career as a marketing manager, but she avoided it whenever she could. One day, Olivia was asked to give a presentation at a conference. At first, she felt terrified, but instead of saying no, Olivia decided to face her fear. She took a public speaking course to learn techniques for speaking confidently. She also practiced in front of a mirror and recorded herself so she could improve her delivery. On the day of the presentation, Olivia still felt nervous, but she was well prepared. She followed the techniques she had learned and focused on speaking slowly and clearly. She made eye contact with the audience, and soon she felt more at ease. By the end of her talk, Olivia had gained the confidence she needed. Her colleagues praised her for the excellent presentation, and it felt like a huge achievement for Olivia. Olivia's story teaches us that it's okay to be nervous about something new, but with practice, we can improve. Public speaking is a skill that anyone can develop with time and effort. Let's dive deeper into the stories that can inspire you to keep going and improving in your English learning journey. As you listen to these real-life stories, think about how they relate to your own experiences and what lessons you can take away from them. Whether it's learning new skills, overcoming challenges, or making small changes to improve your life, each story has something to teach. This next story is about a man named James. James worked as a teacher and he loved his job. He was passionate about helping his students learn and grow. However, he started noticing something. His students were struggling with motivation. They weren't as excited about learning as they used to be. James realized that it wasn't just the students who needed to change. It was his teaching approach. James decided to try something new. He began asking his students more questions during lessons,